Brunelleschi and the international Gothic man of the hour, Lorenzo Ghiberti. Brunelleschi was pretty good, but he ain't no Ghiberti. Ghiberti wins, Brunelleschi runs away with his tail between his legs, humiliated in defeat.
He loses the competition to Ghiberti in 1401. And it sets up the kind of perfect opportunity for him to leave the city of Florence, then go to Rome and study the secrets of the ancients.
Brunelleschi may have spent nearly 2 decades studying in Rome, examining the most important structures of great Roman engineering.
Renaissance Italians are fascinated with the way Romans did everything, the way things were done in ancient Rome, and building is no exception. A big part of the enterprise of Renaissance engineering is recovering this ancient knowledge.
One structure in particular may have had a lasting impression on the young Brunelleschi: the Pantheon. Had the Romans found a way to build it without complex wooden scaffolding supporting it? Over those 2 painstaking decades, he may have examined every inch of that dome, which spanned 142 feet, struggling to unlock the secrets of its construction. When Brunelleschi returned to Florence, he could have brought with him the secrets of Roman dome construction.
It seems that Brunelleschi reappears in Florence just at the time that the Opera of the cathedral was in fact planning on this competition for the design of the dome. The cathedral was to be, upon completion, the largest church in all of Christianity.
It would be one of the greatest construction challenges Italy had ever seen.
They were building it large to sort of show the world exactly how important the city was on all levels. The problem is that they were setting themselves up for a big fall.
Unlike the other architects, Brunelleschi boldly proposed a method that would earn him ridicule. He designed a dome without the traditional use of flying buttresses, wooden supports, and internal scaffolding.
General public opinion was that Brunelleschi had gone very simply mad. They also began to realize that no one else seems to have any clearer picture of how to pull this thing off, and so they began gradually sort of heed his words.
Brunelleschi managed to win over the judges with his unique design, but much to his dismay, the commission would come with one infuriating stipulation.
It seems that fate would rear its ugly head because he would have to share that role with his nemesis, Lorenzo Ghiberti.
With many convinced his design would never work, Brunelleschi would not only have to design his great dome, he would have to engineer his rival's defeat as well. On August 7th, 1420, with Brunelleschi hovering over every detail, construction of the Great Dome finally began.
What Brunelleschi decides to do is to construct not one dome, but 2. Okay? A dome within a dome.
When standing inside the cathedral, people would be able to take in the beautifully decorated internal dome. But from the outside, the second dome would have a more functional purpose.
He would use that second shell to protect the inner dome from rain, but at the same time to make the entire structure look more gonfia et magnifica, more swollen and magnificent.
To give the shells a structural foundation, marble ribs would be installed for every angle of the octagonal dome. Then, rows of arches would be built to intersect the ribs at 90-degree angles. But Brunelleschi faced one enormous logistical problem: finding a way to lift several tons of material up to heights of more than 200 feet.
And so Brunelleschi devises something we call the ox hoist.
Oxen yoked to a tiller turned a vertical shaft to raise or lower the hoist. The stroke of genius was a screw that changed gears from forward to reverse and the direction from up or down. This meant the oxen didn't need to be taken out of the harness and spun around. They could keep walking in the same direction to both raise and lower the hoist, a saving of literally hours every day. By the end of the project, It would lift an estimated 70 million pounds. But the material that had been so carefully lifted still had to be moved laterally and then perfectly placed hundreds of feet in the air. To accomplish this seemingly impossible feat, Brunelleschi designed a second entirely new kind of hoist called a castello.
The castello was a crane that they used to move weights horizontally.
Perched high on the cupola and resembling a gallows, it used a crossbeam and counterweight system, allowing builders to place material with millimetrical precision.
These are the machines that he was introducing, and these are the machines that made it possible for such a dome to have been built.
But all of this creative thinking still didn't solve the fundamental challenge of constructing such an expansive dome with no internal support. Brunelleschi would still need to figure out how to prevent it from collapsing. It would demand his greatest leap of imagination yet, combined with a lot of hardcore calculation. Brunelleschi was granted the first modern patent for his invention of a river transport vessel. (1420), Florence, Italy. The visionary architect and engineer, Filippo Brunelleschi, has been commissioned to construct the most magnificent dome in the world, the cupola at Santa Maria del Fiore. But first, he will need to prevent it from crumbling to the ground without supports.
Now, it's one thing to invent a clutch and a flywheel, and you got the donkey only going in one direction, saves a lot of time, and then you invent a crane, it brings the stuff up high. But the more important question is, I'm standing on top of this dome, and how did Brunelleschi keep this sucker from caving in?
He would have to find a way to keep the bricks in place and support the bed joints of the masonry. The solution? An ingenious bricklaying technique that relied on careful angles, placement, and friction.
Brunelleschi comes up with this invention, if you will, from Rome, which they use decoratively, but we don't know that they use it functionally, of herringbone bricks. You have a short brick here that's sort of bookended by two long bricks, and subsequently you have weight coming down, then weight coming down, and then weight coming across, and then weight coming down, and then weight coming across. The whole point of this is that a herringbone pattern will displace the weight out and down instead of just directly down, where you might have a collapse of your dome.
To solve the opposite problem of bricks bursting outward, Brunelleschi laid a set of chains horizontally around the octagonal circumference of the dome.
They were going to construct these so-called catene, or these horizontal chains that were intended to maintain the hoop stress, or the lateral thrust of the dome.
5 chains were to be interlocked at regular intervals to support the dome and serve as invisible buttressing. All this time, Brunelleschi was forced to supervise the project with his co-engineer and rival, Ghiberti. Now, with material for the placement of the chains pouring in, he would seize the opportunity to move Ghiberti out.
In August of 1423, Brunelleschi called in sick. Ghiberti rather reluctantly then begins the direction of the placement of these wooden chains. And as soon as Brunelleschi heard that the process had begun, he miraculously recovers, inspects the quality of Ghiberti's work, and criticizes it publicly, saying they would have to undo everything he had done.
With Ghiberti sufficiently humiliated, Brunelleschi was declared the head of the project for life. On August 30th, 1436, after 16 years of construction, the largest masonry dome in the world was completed. But Brunelleschi's career was far from over. Even before the completion of the Duomo, he had been experimenting with perspective and mathematical proportions. Although his structures appeared simple and straightforward in design, there were spatial games being played with the lines of buildings. And one of Brunelleschi's greatest innovations was a concept that is still a cornerstone of engineering today: single-point perspective. By looking at this 8-sided baptistry and the other buildings surrounding it, Brunelleschi realized if he placed 3-dimensional buildings on a 2-dimensional plane, they would disappear at a finite point, called the vanishing point. This idea that the apparent size of an object would decrease with increasing distance from the eye would transform the entire landscape for artists and architects around the world, allowing the concept of the blueprint to emerge.
What it does in architecture is change the game all the way through Frank Lloyd Wright and to Frank Gehry today. Because architecture is no more just building. It isn't figuring it out in the dirt and saying, hey, if this wall is that long, we got to make the spire that high. Now they can deduce it and put it on paper. It's no longer the builder who's in control, it's the architect.
Before Brunelleschi, most projects were based on approximate models. This would come to an end when Brunelleschi began this practice of what we call paper architecture, and that is clearly indicating what his plans were, and then begins the sort of modern tradition of architecture today.
Brunelleschi's radical new designs would be put to the test in 1442 in his construction of the Pazzi Chapel.
Now, this building behind me is the chapter house for the Church of Santa Croce, a Franciscan church. It's called the Pazzi Chapel. I'm going to talk to a man I'm a little nervous talking to. He's one of my own professors from Syracuse University, Dr. Rab Hatfield, and he's going to explain why this chapel is distinct from what Brunelleschi was doing before this. Let's go look on the inside.
Let's go see them. It's all about relationships. And he's trying to figure out an arrangement of all of these pieces so they all fit together perfectly, just the way the bones all fit together in your body.
Right.
Your Renaissance architect, thanks to the invention of scientific perspective, where they learn how to represent space, and it's Brunelleschi who invents this, learn to see things in 3D, learn to imagine things in 3D.
Rather than flying by the seat of your pants, you start with a concept and you follow the concept to its fruition in perfection.
And I think you get a very good sense of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's spatial magic.
Brunelleschi's innovations in design and construction techniques would be emulated by architects for centuries. But a new era was dawning in the age of architects. Neighboring powers rekindled old rivalries. And artists who had turned into architects and engineers would now be drafted into a new kind of public service. Now they'd turn their creative thinking to the art of war. Brunelleschi used more than 4 million bricks in the construction of the dome. (1459). Filippo Brunelleschi has become the father of Renaissance architecture, making Florence a mecca for innovations in design and construction. Now his methods and ideas spread beyond his republic, as architects throughout the region would launch ambitious building campaigns.
Filippo Brunelleschi transforms all of architectural design by using Roman elements like this column and pilasters and numerical proportions, integrating them into an elegant and beautiful whole that is never overwhelmed by one of the parts. But he doesn't write it down. It's up to a young guy, the next generation, Leon Battista Alberti. This guy did everything. He wrote about architecture, archaeology, political science, religion, even wrote about horse